start the recording so I don't forget. Good to see you, Anna. How are you?
Good to see you. Fine, great. Looking forward for my holidays.
Yes, I think everyone is.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining.
Thank you too.
Okay, so let's get started, and I'm sure we will have more participants who will join us in the upcoming minutes. Great. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining today. I know this is the end of the year, and you all have many things you want to wrap up before the holidays. So I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Moria, unfortunately, could not join us. She had another, I think, a class to teach at this particular time, so she apologized, and she wished you also, with a bit of in advance, a very nice holiday season. Great. So for those who are new, once again, I mean, the purpose of this community is really to bring together, I mean, people interested in different type of research. It can be much more practical or much more theoretical type of research in academic settings or not academic settings. We really welcome any kind of research, and the goal really is to build this community and potentially to find some opportunities to further collaborate and for sure to learn from each other. So we also have a chat group. If some of you are not part of the WhatsApp group, sorry. If some of you are not part of WhatsApp group, please feel free to join anytime. We have not, to be honest, we have not been very active this year, but we will try to change that in the upcoming year. Now, so for those of you who are new today, so we had 5 knowledge sharing sessions in the past. So we had the first one with Carrie and Sasha, who talked about knowledge hiding. And in fact, Carrie just successfully defended her PhD dissertation yesterday on her knowledge hiding project. So good for her. Yes, congratulations to her. And she did a very interesting research on comparing knowledge hiding behaviors in China and in Germany. We had also Manfred, who is with us today, and who also gave us a very interesting and good presentation on KM policies. And there was a lot to be learned on this. This was in May. Then in June, we had David from Australia, who joined us and told us about also some of the work I think he was working on for his dissertation related to social capital and in the context of project teams. A bit later on in August, we had Bruce Boyce from Real KM magazine, who presented a very interesting and novel and a bit challenging topic on not topic to be announced, I guess, but it was decolonization of knowledge. Sorry, I picked the wrong image. I didn't notice that, but very interesting topic. And we had also, our last meeting was with Pierre Solé from France, who also talked about some of the work he had done on his latest book on how knowledge can lead to ideation. So these are the presenters we had this year. I have to apologize a bit. We have not been running on a regular basis, and so we have not been very active since September, but we still wanted to have a last event this year. And next year, we'll make sure that we meet every 2 months and that we will announce in advance who will be presenting, so you can better plan it in your calendar. So we are working on it right now. So today, so all this, for those of you who are interested in this presentation and could not attend. All these presentations are available also on our YouTube channel, on the KMGN YouTube channel. You have a section for this KMGN research community. So all of them are now available there, so you can watch them if you're interested in the topic. So today I'm very thankful that Merci accepted to present again late in December, and so she will share with us today some of the work she has done, some of the research work she has done on critical thinking. So Merci, I will stop sharing my screen, and the screen is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Manfred. Just confirm that my audio is
Yes.
audible.
Yes,
okay.
Perfectly fine, Merci. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone on the call. As Manfred had said, my name is Merci Kgosidialwa. I hope I said that enough.
I didn't take the risk to pronounce your last name because I know I will get it wrong, but thank you for pronouncing it for us.
Okay, so the direct translation really is chiefs are fighting, but obviously there's really no conflict. It's really just a name. And so I hail from Botswana. I'm actually speaking to you from Botswana right now, and the time right now is 2:08 p.m. Central African time. So I'll take you through a brief introduction of who I am and my interest really in critical thinking and in critical thinking skills. And the research that I'm going to present to you is what I had presented in fulfillment of my Master of Philosophy in Knowledge and Information Management in 2021 with the University of Stellenbosch, which is in the southern part of South Africa in the Cape. And so I'll just take you through what the objectives of this research was, obviously the considerations that I had to take in designing the study. And if I'm going too fast, please, Vincent, don't be scared to stop me. I do tend to speak a bit too fast. All right, and then the methodological considerations that I had to take in designing the study, the limitations that I had to work through, the literature review that I did, and how I then constructed the tool that I used to analyze the empirical data that I had, how I implemented that tool, the results of this particular research, and really the major conclusions and what these conclusions really mean for knowledge management and for the knowledge worker. All right. So my name, as I've said, is Merci. I'm sure it's very simple for you to also pronounce, especially with the French background. By qualification, I am qualified in information systems from Monash University in 2007, and then I obtained the MPhil in knowledge management in 2021 with Stellenbosch University. I have other complementary certifications in project management and change management, but I believe for this particular audience, the one of interest would be the CKM, which is actually very new. I proudly am able to say to you that I did pass the certification just 2 weeks ago, so it's still quite fresh in my mind. My employer is the Engineers Registration Board in Botswana, which is a regulator of the engineering profession. So our job really is to set standards of practice, standards of professional practice, of conduct, and so forth, and then implement this in the engineering profession. We are a statutory body as well, so we have been set up through an Act of Parliament. My role is the registration manager, and so I'm responsible for obviously the data and the information that we keep on the engineers, the areas of practice, their conduct, and so forth. I also do strategy development and stakeholder management and communications for the organization. My biggest hobbies are playing tennis, not pro, unfortunately, and camping. I do a lot of overlanding camping with my husband. Right. And so in terms of this particular study that I undertook as part of my MPhil, the background really of the study was that, you know, as a country, you could imagine that we're still a developing economy. And so the country has really taken a decision to transform into a knowledge-based economy. Really, I think we all know that we are operating in the knowledge age. And so it is an imperative for any country to ensure that, you know, it has moved with the times. It does have a pool of knowledge workers, even its citizenry, you know, are able to work and think as knowledge workers. And I think to also show the commitment towards this particular resolve, the country has dedicated 18% of its recurrent budget to education. I think, it's quite a large chunk. It could be better, but this basically says that the country is really trying to develop its human resource from grassroots level to ensure that, it's got a good enough pool of knowledge workers who can help it also compete in the knowledge economy. However, obviously, there are contrasts. I think as in any developing economy, there are reports of the lack thereof of quality in education. There are many factors that have been identified. You look at rankings on the GCI, for example, in 2019, Botswana was ranked 91 out of 141 countries in terms of its competitiveness. And in the skills pillar, if you go through the GCI, you'll see all those pillars that they refer to. In the skills pillar, the country ranked number 94 out of 141 and number 99 in the innovation capability pillar. And I think we all know that innovation and knowledge and knowledge work really go in tandem. You cannot have you cannot participate in the knowledge economy when innovation is still lagging behind. So the study therefore sought to determine the level and nature of critical thinking skills development in tertiary education in Botswana, and then obviously then construct a tool that I could use to analyze this particular extent and level. And so it was really delimited to tertiary education context. Sorry about that. All right, and then in terms of the considerations that I had to take in when designing the study, logically it was only feasible to assess only one university. We do have quite a number of universities in the country of higher learning, and do pardon the spelling mistake, their own university. The key university is the University of Botswana, the oldest one in the country. It has recently been 10 years ago by the Botswana International University of Science and Technology. This is still the government's effort to really try and develop, its knowledge power. And empirically, then the evidence that I collected was examination papers in this particular university, which is a science and technology university. And these were deemed really to be reasonable proxies of the broader educational process. We know that in the educational process, you would have assessments at certain intervals, which obviously are seeking to determine certain levels of understanding or learning, whatever it may have been. The starting point was that these obviously, as summative assessments, would by and large need to have been able to assess, a certain level of attainment for all the students have learned. It could be throughout that particular year or even throughout the entire program. And ethically, the data that I was using is freely and still available on the World Wide Web. So there were no data integrity issues in that particular, or even protection issues. And the research focus, as I said, was the actual extent and level in Botswana of critical thinking skills as they were observed in end-of-year examination papers at the Botswana International University of Science and Technology. And what I did to then analyze this particular set of data, I applied both textual and content analysis to the year-end examination papers to gain or obtain the empirical evidence that I needed. And then how I also developed the tool is I used the Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain. So I used this to standardize and then also be able to synthesize the discourse around critical thinking. You will appreciate that there is quite a lot of literature around critical thinking. So it was very important that I find a literature that sort of really brings all of these together and is able to give us a framework that we can use to interpret or even define critical thinking. In terms of the limitations, as I've noted, we could only restrict this to one university, though obviously those logistical constraints, even financial resource constraints. And another limitation being that critical thinking alone is a subcategory of learning. So there are many other aspects of learning that we can also measure, but I believe for purposes of, of giving knowledge back to knowledge management or even the knowledge age, critical thinking is one of the core skills that, as knowledge workers, we should have a keen interest in. And the thesis would then only be able to contribute to the situation at the time of publishing this particular study. There are, however, instances where we can still apply some of the findings from this particular study. And so in my literature review, I chose to focus on some key definitions of critical thinking, the key one being that from Peter A. Faccioni, which he says, critical thinking to him should be purposeful. So it must be very intentional, because thinking is obviously done by people who have all their faculties. And it's self-regulatory in its sense, meaning that even when we're thinking critically, we need to be totally aware of, the influences and the biases and whatever other things may implicate our thinking patterns. And this particular thinking would result in analysis, interpretation, evaluation, and inference. And we also need to be able to explain the evidence and the conceptual, methodological, characterological, and contextual considerations upon which we base that particular judgment. And so when I take a particular decision, for example, I would need to be able to, for example, back it up with facts and give people those facts, maybe be able to back it up with concepts, whether there's a history to it. So critical thinking really speaks to being able to defend the particular judgment or decisions that you make with some sort of backing knowledge. And in terms of the skills, which one would then be able to exhibit when we say that they're able to think critically. Tia Angelo says that these are higher order thinking skills. So, by assumption, then we would say that there are lower order thinking skills that we could also consider. And these skills are those such as analysis, synthesis, problem recognition, and problem solving, inference, and evaluation. So these were the primary definitions that I really chose to stick to for the purposes of this particular study. And then in terms of developing the framework as well, Bloom's taxonomy served quite a huge basis of the framework that I developed. I believe the audience here would be very familiar with Bloom, so I'll really just touch it on the surface. It's a framework for teaching and learning objectives, which was developed by Benjamin Bloom and his team of scientists way back in the 50s. And then 5 decades later, we saw a bit of work being done on this particular framework, and particularly on the cognitive dimension of the framework. So Bloom's taxonomy had 3 particular dimensions, being the cognitive, one that speaks to our cognition and how we think and our intellect. And then he also said that learning could also occur in the affective domain, which really speaks to our emotions and so forth. Or learning could also take in the psychomotor domain, which really speaks to our ability to take some particular action. So it could be in sports, it could be in whatever. So learning in the sense of, in sports, they'll always say that practice makes perfect. So you have to go and do those swings on the baseball court to be able to perfect that particular skill. So the psychomotor really spoke to the movement parts of being able to learn. So the changes that were introduced by Anderson and Crathwell in 2001 highlighted a mapping of the higher order thinking skills that we really have interest in, or the critical thinking skills. So on the left side, if you allow me to just pick a highlighter here. Or can you see my mouse really?
Yes, we can see your mouse. Yes.
Okay, sorry. All right. Oh, let me project. Oh, there we go. So on the left side of my screen here, you will see that originally Bloom had said that learning in the cognitive domain really happens in this particular order. First we say that people have knowledge, and then we'd be able to say that people comprehend particular concepts, they're able to apply those concepts. They're also able to perform some sort of analysis based on concepts or even facts. They're able to synthesize information and even then be able to conduct some sort of evaluation. Anderson and Crathwell then said, well, in our view, yes, the framework is okay, but we believe that first and foremost, when learning occurs, one is only able to recall facts or certain facts in memory, and then after that, we would say that a person is able to understand or show understanding of particular concepts or even facts by being able to exemplify them. For example, so if you look on the table on the right as well, I'll just give a couple of those examples as well. So understanding would be exemplified by one being able to maybe summarize concepts and facts, being able to make inferences or comparisons of information or knowledge. And then in terms of application, then they said that when we say that one is able to apply certain concepts or certain knowledge, then we see them being able to execute or even carry out, in the form of maybe calculations, they'd be able to execute certain calculations, or even implementing, being able to use certain concepts to come up with particular designs. And then they said in terms of the cognitive process of being able to analyze, one would need to be able to differentiate, discriminate or distinguish between facts or even concepts, being able to organize information now. having learned different concepts, are you able to organize those particular concepts to tell a particular story, or even attributing certain facts to particular concept? And then the next process would be that of evaluation, being able to check whether things actually are in congruence, being able to monitor, and even being able to critique. In the academic space, obviously, a lot of you would be engaged in tasks where you need to critique maybe your PhD submissions and so forth. And finally, they said at the very highest order, people should be able to come up with new and novel knowledge or even new products that really speaks to innovation. And I've already spoken about the considerations in terms of the methodology, both textual and content analysis. So it really was a very granular analysis of questions that were contained in the examination papers and what these questions were really probing for. And from that deduction, then I'd be able to make a call of whether, were they testing this particular knowledge dimension or this particular cognitive process. And I'll speak to the knowledge process dimensions in the next slide. The tool obviously is based on Bloom's. It was developed on the Microsoft Excel platform, with our x-axis indicating the cognitive process dimension. So that would be the remembering, your creating, your analysis, and the knowledge process dimension, which I'll speak to in the next slide, which really speaks to whether it's facts, or whether it's concepts, or whether it's metacognition. Certain parts of the instrument, according to my analysis, only indicate critical thinking skills. So not the entire framework indicates that people are learning critical thinking skills, only a certain dimension of it shows that. And the tool was applied to 64 examination papers, which were obtained on the university website. And so this is the resultant tool that I came up with based on the taxonomy. So you would see along the x-axis here, we have the cognitive process dimensions that I spoke about, whether you're able to remember or show understanding, application, analysis, evaluation, or creation. And what Anderson and Krathwohl further said was that not in the knowledge process dimension, knowledge could either be factual knowledge. So these are facts that lie in particular theories. We've got Ohm's law, we've got whatever other facts. If there's an accident that occurred this many years ago, it's a fact, it lies there, it doesn't change. But then there's also knowledge of concepts. Concepts regarding to maybe disciplines of study in engineering, disciplines of study in perhaps I think even knowledge management. And then there's what we call procedural knowledge. This would really speak to, in educational settings, in your mathematics, in your engineering and sciences, where there's a lot of calculations that we need to be able to use to come up to come up with certain deductions. And then there's the metacognitive knowledge. Here they said that this really speaks to knowledge about your own thinking. So as you're engaged in thinking, are you aware of your own thinking patterns? Are you aware when you're subjected to bias? Are you aware when you're being very subjective? And are you even able to call that out? So they say that in terms of knowledge, we also need to have knowledge of that particular aspect of our thinking. And then on the right here, I was just trying to demonstrate the sample analysis that I had to do. So I'll just pick those 3 examples here. One of the questions asked for the students to name 2 sequencing strategies that were used in the Human Genome Project. And my deduction here was that this question was testing the students' ability to recall facts about certain elements. So in my deduction, this particular question was testing remembering of factual knowledge. So it would then lie in this particular space over here. So what I would do is when a question carries 2 marks like this, then the 2 marks would then go in here. So the entire table would then account for the entire examination paper. So as you can see here, if a paper was out of 150 marks, the marks over here would need to also total to that. And then I'd come up with the percentages or the respective representations in terms of percentage in the framework. The next question would then would say that what is the difference between paired end and mate pair sequencing? And then it also called for the students to give examples. So my deduction was that this question requires learners to contrast between 2 elements and then be able to then exemplify other elements which utilize those particular concepts. So it was testing rather for understanding of conceptual knowledge. And then it falls over here. The last one here really calls for students to apply procedural knowledge. So they would have obviously learned this particular calculation of load resistors. And so they need to then be able to apply that particular procedure to come up with the resultant load. And so here I just give a high level view of what I found in the analysis, very granular analysis, as I said. So overall, in the first year examination papers, this is what we found. A lot of the testing was really along the domain of applying of procedural knowledge. So one would assume here that maybe the students were being introduced to a lot of laws and calculations, and maybe a lot of the questions then would really test the ability to apply those particular calculations. So this is a science and engineering university. So I believe this would then follow from that particular fact. As we move higher though, you would see that the profile sorts of start to change. In the second year, the overall profile demonstrated that a lot of the testing was really along the understanding of conceptual knowledge, which obviously then would speak to, if it's engineering, civil engineering, for example, they'd be taught about maybe loads in structural analysis. They'd be taught about maybe how to apply certain principles in engineering projects. And that really speaks to conceptual knowledge about that particular discipline. But I think, and then as we go higher, we see that the same profile then remains to persist in the third and the fourth year. We still find that a lot of the testing was really still around the understanding of conceptual knowledge. And I think we can already see here that there may be certain limitations in terms of how these students would then be able to apply themselves in industry, because as we progress higher in our levels, one would expect that now students are now being taught the skills of being able to now contribute to the body of knowledge. And here we're talking about this particular space up there, being able to synthesize or create even new knowledge, or even innovate, in that particular projects, because some of the examination papers that we went through were actually project papers, or where students had to come up with particular projects. So we found that a lot of even the testing in there really spoke to that understanding of concepts and not necessarily probing them to come up with novel products or innovations. And then what we did, then we just tried to come up with an overall critical thinking profile of all the examination papers. So here really we're just looking at when we classify critical thinking as only the skill of apply. And here we're really just testing certain parameters, because as I said, both apply, evaluation, and create are all lying in the critical thinking or higher order thinking skills domain. We found that only in the first year, only 26% really called for the skill of applying of factual or even conceptual knowledge. Went down in the second year, the third and the fourth year, at least there was that sort of gradual progression. But one would have expected that it would have been more and more as we go higher, and not lower as we found in the second year. And we also find that in terms of the academic levels, we find the same pattern here. The skill of create, we found that it was actually tested for, called for really in very minimal situations over the years. There was a small mistake that I made here, you pardon me for that. And then overall, really, what we found was that in all the examination papers, only 11% out of all those 64 examination papers, only 11% really called for students to apply those critical thinking skills, or really invoke those critical thinking skills in their thinking patterns, or to even demonstrate that they have learned in their programs. And so the major conclusions that we drew out of the study was, overall, it's very glaring that there's an absence of progression from lower order thinking skills to the higher order thinking skills that one would necessarily want to instill as students progress towards graduation. And a lot of the testing or even trying to determine whether students have fulfilled the learning process was really in looking at whether students have understood conceptual knowledge and whether they are able to apply procedural knowledge. But we know that in the world of work, it works very differently. We're looking for candidates who are able to innovate and come up with novel solutions to even smaller problems. And then the other conclusion that I really drew from this was that the higher order thinking skills of analysis, evaluation, and create are way underrepresented across all the examination papers. So in the whole profile of examination papers that we looked at, it was a similar trend. And really, at the very end, one would ask, but what are the implications now for the knowledge economy? The World Economic Forum says that critical thinking is one of the top 10 skills for 2025. And we know that these skills are key skills for the knowledge age and for the knowledge worker. And so really, what does it mean when in a country that is aspiring to also participate in or even compete in the knowledge economy, but is maybe still failing to ensure that these particular skills are learned and applied? It means then it results in a lack of creativity and innovation. Operating in a VUCA world really depends on our abilities, on our creative abilities rather, and it largely depends also on our higher order thinking skills, because these are what fosters agility in this volatile world. The agility that we're speaking to here, you speak to volatile markets, you would speak to, I don't know how to frame it, but we know that we have two major crises in the world in two different regions of the world, where there's a lot of instability and turbulence, and really working in this type of world, and where innovation really is happening at such a fast rate. And so we need a country with people who are able to respond to those particular challenges. Over and above that, we find that when you are developing a manpower that does not have these particular skills, you're now going to be working with people who are unable to apply information filters. So everything to them would be something that's worth considering. But I think we know that when you're given information, you need to have the ability to be able to filter, remove out of superfluous, and only keep that which is important for the particular decision that you want to make. Else you're left with very ineffective decisions and just loops and loops of ineffective actions as well. It also leads to ineffective learning. The lack of higher order thinking skills also results in ineffective learning cycles of individuals who have very little awareness of their own cognition. And so, a lot of times when you engage with people, you recognize that they really don't recognize the sort of biases that they operate under. Are they able to manage themselves as they're being pulled side to side by whether it's cultural biases or whether it's confirmation biases? Are they able to bring objectivity back into the picture because they are aware of all of this? And finally, I think in an inability to recognize the biases, rather, as I've said, and leading to really irrational judgments in our decision making. And I think for the knowledge worker and the knowledge economy, I think this is a very important one, because our primary role as knowledge managers is to be able to provide people with timely knowledge and information to be able to make impactful decisions. And so if we're not able to do that, then it really is detrimental to the entire knowledge economy. And with this, Vincent, thank you very much for the opportunity, and this is where I land.
Thank you so much, Merci, for this great presentation. So now I will invite all of the participants to apply your critical thinking skills to ask questions to to Merci. And I have a few questions, but I will first invite anyone who has a question just to take the mic and to ask directly to.
Hello.
Hello.
Greetings.
Hey.
I had a question about how do you best see how critical thinking can be inserted into young brains?
All right. Do you want me to go through each of them, Vincent, or I can collect a few and then respond?
No, let's answer them on the fly. Yes, I think it would be easier. Yes.
All right. And so I think as I said, in terms of the framework, it shows that for one to say that is operating within the critical thinking domain, we need to be able to teach them skills of be able to come up with new products. We need to be able to teach them the skills of being able to apply the procedural knowledge and to even do evaluations. So, give them certain facts and concepts and even problems, and see the evaluation of how those particular problems could be solved. And I think, so what's important is to be able to inject those sort of, you may call it exercises, you may call them assessments, those sort of elements that, really invoke the learners to apply those particular skills. Because if in every examination at the end of the semester, it's really, your questions are phrased as what is, or who is, or instead of perhaps asking how. So when you ask somebody how, you're already asking them to now consider maybe multiple concepts and see, okay, in terms of solving this particular problem, maybe there's a certain concept that I can apply, and then I can also take learnings from another concept and combine those. So already now we're sort of synthesizing two concepts, and then we're coming up with a new solution. So I think one of the best ways really is to involve students to be able to innovate, even at that level, because innovation can really happen anyway. Thanks, Vincent. Thank you, Edwin.
Joanne?
Take off mute. Good morning. Thank you. This is fascinating. There's so many places you could take it. I wanted to just give a takeaway, and I want to come back to your discipline. But one of the things that very low awareness of their own biases, and I'm working now in America's biases and understanding of the political framework. And it just takes me back to the fact that we're not personally applying critical thinking in our own cultures, right? So that was like the big picture takeaway. The other piece that I had was between critical thinking and knowledge management. I understand it, and we are all knowledge managers, and it just feels like it's a heavy lift. Or could you talk about because the students are not prepared for critical thinking, how can you prepare them for knowledge management, which is really where you might want them to be as they enter a workforce?
Yeah, sure. And tricky one, hey, tricky one. I have seen in certain instances, as I was doing my research, you find that, for example, in the law profession, a lot of the preparatory work for the industry, would be done in. I think there's a tool called it's a critical thinking assessment that they do. But even through this critical thing, I'm going to remember the name. Just forgive me there, Joanne. So really, it's preparatory in terms of, so they would assess your skills before you enter the industry, because the assumption is you would have learned these particular skills. But then as you enter the industry as well, you're subjected to these particular assessments. So some of them are aptitude assessments, some of them would be psychometric assessments, as a way of trying to then prepare you for the industry. And I think we've seen that these work in the law profession, as we've said, these also work in the engineering disciplines and other scientific disciplines. I think the same can also work really in any other discipline, really. I think we see also as some sort of preparatory work for entering into the industry, or even certain roles, being subjected to assessments that check whether you're able to make certain inferences, certain deductions through the psychometric. And I know we all hate these, but I think ultimately this is really what they're trying to determine. And then if there's sort of some tailoring of training that you can then do to address those, then you can know how to fill those particular gaps. And so the gap between the graduation and the world of work, I think it's still a big one. It really poses a lot of challenges for the employers, particularly with the new age generation that is just about currency. They're not going to sit for 2-hour psychometric tests. So the challenge is really upon us, the employers and the knowledge managers, to tailor activities that can sort of foster that sort of thinking, in small packets of exercise or trainings or whatever it may be. We could even, ingrain this into our SharePoint. We could ingrain this, because SharePoint nowadays really is a social network. So we could ingrain some of these into how we gamify our experience in the organization. Because through that gamification, then you're also invoking particular thought patterns as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Manfred?
Well, thank you, Mercy. I really enjoyed listening to your presentation, particularly the slides 13 and 14, when you showed the charts about the different levels on critical thinking and the grades. My first question, obviously, is the benchmarking. So where is the leader? Have you found some material on that? And I have a second one. For example, how to move on, what to do to become a little bit more critical thinking, and I had good experiences with the concept of system thinking, which is obviously not the same, but it helps people to understand different drivers of systems, yeah, and how they impact each other. And then it moves a little bit forward from just learning by heart to, oh, I change here and there's an impact on like 5 layers below or above or whatever. Yeah. So first question, benchmarking. A second question is, do you make experiences with system thinking as well?
All right. So in terms of the benchmarks, I think some of the benchmarks that I came across in the literature would lie in Europe and in the Americas. For example, the tool that I spoke about, I think it's Logan Hovels, if I'm not wrong. It was developed in the US and it's used as a tool both in the Americas and in Europe as well. It's also used in universities in those particular areas. And I think in these particular universities, also that you probably find them in higher rankings of universities in the world, because these.
But there is a correlation.
There is a correlation. Yes, there's a correlation. And in terms of the correlation with the systems thinking and critical thinking, in my opinion, I think, and as you have said, a critical thinker would then be one who's able to see. If I'm going to take a particular action, it's going to have an impact on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas. So a critical thinker, by extension, then should really have that whole picture. But we find that with this particular profile, we have unidimensional thinkers. There's only one particular result out of one particular action. And so we find that, we have people who take actions that have got an impact. I mean, if you look at, for example, the crises that we're having with the wars, it's not only the impact of people losing their lives, the impact on the economy, now it's the impact on our own lives as well, those of us who are very far away from the particular crisis. So for me, the correlation really is that then a non-critical thinker is not able to recognize all of these things that make up the world. Thank you, Manfred.
Thank you.
Any additional question for Mercy? Yes, John?
Yes, I'm also a faculty in higher education, and wanted. I know in a picture where you want to improve students' readiness for the working, if you wanted to give them something to think about, so they had a big picture understanding when they're in school of where they can go afterwards, that they can keep with them at all times. Because once you go into business, you just lose all focus. You get subsumed by that business environment and you tend to stop self-caring and self-teaching and creating your own sense of self. If you were to tell a graduating class where they could go relative to building their own best selves as far as knowledge workers across their whole career. I know it's a big picture question, but if you were the lecturer or the speaker at a ceremony, what would be your advice to a graduating class today?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, no, it's a big picture question. Sure. And I would say, I find that learning from experiences that we enjoy, which is obviously never the case, but really things that we're passionate about, because things you're passionate about you could either do in the job or even outside of the job. So giving ourselves opportunities to learn and through our passions, for me, I think gives one a big footing in terms of broadening our awareness and being able to think critically. And I can recall 20 years ago, I think, when I graduated from high school, I then volunteered to work on, I think it was the United Nations Children's, with UNICEF. And so part of what we had to do was, go and engage with little children in the hospitals. And during Christmas, we would go to department stores and just give out gifts and so forth. That gives you an opportunity to interact with all manner of people in the world, because when you're in school, you're obviously only exposed to your family and your classmates. You're really unaware of what else exists out there. So I found that as I then progressed to university, I already had the skills of compassion. For example, I knew that that a lot of other people with different backgrounds, because all the people I went to school with could afford Christmas gifts and so forth, but we have people who cannot afford that type of lifestyle. So already, even as I'm learning, I know that I'm learning to offer solutions to a world in which we have people with different backgrounds, differing abilities. You get to meet people with different, and it's a very current topic now, neurodiversity. People who may not be able to speak, but they look at this particular item in front of me and they see a whole new world in it, because you get to engage with those particular people. So, and in a world where, the Gen Zs now really live on their mobile phones, social interaction has really fallen back. So you really want to get people back in the spaces where there is still a bit of social interaction, because there's a lot of learning that can come from there, which then also hones our critical thinking skills. Thank you, Joanne.
Okay, let me ask a few questions too. So thank you again for your great presentation. And so I relate very well to what you just described. I mean, we developed 5 years ago at Bangkok University an MBI, a Master in Business Innovation. And again, we wanted to differentiate ourselves from the traditional MBA, focusing much more on innovation and creativity. And so this year we had to review the program, and the quality assurance department of the university, but even of higher education, asked us now, I mean, to go in very, very detail. What are the program learning outputs? What are the course learning outputs? And to identify for each courses, for each session, even what are the outputs we expect students to learn in terms of knowledge, skills, behaviors, and also using Bloom's taxonomy to show that, I mean, through every course, or even through every for the sequence of courses in a program, there is we are getting more towards the, top level of Bloom taxonomy, on, as you said, on creating, than on the original one, which are much more focusing on like you said, on remembering or just regurgitating things. So I think, more or less higher education institution, well, probably not everywhere in the world, but more or less are forced nowadays to start to clearly identify how each assignment or each activity in class or outside class somehow contribute to achieve some of these objectives. But I mean, critical thinking might not be part of them. I mean, I would be surprised it's not, but it should really be part of it. So, and as you said, I think to be a critical thinker, you need also to be curious. For instance, you need to have some level of empathy. So there was a lot of sub-different skills that somehow get together that will make someone a better critical thinker than someone else. So I think there are lots of different pieces that needs to be developed also in parallel, or to be able to reach this. So you mentioned that, through your study, and again, as you said, there is some limitation in terms of generalization. You say you found 11% of really the assignment involves some high degree of critical thinking. Ideally, what do you believe could be the target here? I mean, Manfred mentioned about benchmarking, which is of course interesting, but ideally, should it be 50%? Should it be 100%? What do you have any idea on what could be an acceptable score? I mean,
Yeah.
knowing that, not everything is also about critical thinking, but your wish, if you were given to advise the Ministry of Education of Botswana, what percentage would you find?
So yeah, I would say between your 35s and 55s.
Okay.
I think that that would be fair. Obviously, and I think as the questions have shown, quite a larger chunk of the learning also then happens on the job or in industry, because then that's really where the big innovation happens. So as a base, I think, you know, your 30s, 40s, 50s would be a good starting point, in my opinion. There's definitely more that can be done to
Sure.
foster these skills. And we're not saying that, look, we want students to come up with the next electric or solar powered car, whatever it may be. You know, we're just saying that can they demonstrate the ability to be able to do that now when they're posed with those particular challenges. Yeah. And I appreciate your point there about the outcome-based education. I think a lot of the education systems are really trying to move towards that. But I think we still find those particular gaps. You know, if you've
Oh, sure.
identified there's at the beginning of a module and you try and trace that particular process or learning cycle, you find at the very end that, well, we've just been really checking whether people recall things. And so what outcomes have we achieved here?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think, I mean, nowadays, students or everyone has access to generative AI tools. I think it's becoming even much more important for students or kids to develop these critical things, so they don't just absorb whatever come out of this system and don't question it or don't try to go deeper. So I think this that's for sure be an important thing. One last thing, I'm sure that you all have heard about. There is this PISA assessment test which is done by by OECD every, I don't know how often it is done, every 5 years or every 10 years, every 3 years. Okay, that assess, how students, I think around the age of 15 are performing all over the world. I've not looked into the report that just was released a few weeks back, but I know that scores have dropped considerably all over the world. So I think there are some very serious, probably rethinking about how we educate kids and in particularly for future generation. So I think, yeah, we are getting a lot of signals that there is a need to drastically rethink the way we, we educate our students, and yeah, and there is a lot of challenge ahead of us based on that. But as you said, critical thinking, I think, is something that will always have to be there. And as you said, the World Economic Forum has been saying for years and years how important it is, as well as problem-solving skills, creativity skills, and all these kind of skills that, well, AI tools, I will not say are not capable of doing, because I think they are more and more capable of entering these type of skills now. But still, as a human, I think we are still ahead in trying to put the piece together or better understand the so
the
thank you so much.
that exists. So
Okay, Annie, good to see you, and please, you can ask your question. You're muted, Annie. Yeah. Annie, you're muted. We cannot hear you, Annie. Annie. Yeah.
It
Here we
wouldn't
go.
take me off mute. I'm sorry. Hi, Mercy. I actually had somewhat of a couple of questions, and one was around Bloom's taxonomy, but I think Vincent brought that in. And I'm sorry, I kind of missed the presentation. So if I'm asking something that you've already given us insight into, my apologies. I'm kind of curious about, I know that we need that foundation and we need Bloom's taxonomy where we get to a point of synthesis and, even with the critical thinking and everything. But then there are boundaries that we must consider as well to make our decision. So how do you see system thinking playing into that? Because you've got to have a good view of the system or the ecosystem that you're within to know the impacts that are going to happen against the other systems. So how does that tie in with critical thinking is absolutely necessary, but boundaries are also absolutely necessary so that we can come to decisions within the system that we're working within.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we touched a little bit about when I was responding to Manfred's question, in that, you know, obviously when you are aware of how the world works, and how the impact, like I said, of our decisions, if we're aware of our decisions actually in our actions, if we are aware of you know, I can take a learner, for example, who's in a chemical engineering course, for example, and is preparing for a job in a mine. You know, there's aspects of safety that need to be considered in that particular environment. So the safety here would be obviously the physical safety, that then also be the safety related to how you deal with the particular compounds that you would have mined and so forth. So, you know, somebody like that also needs to then be able to know the bounds around that particular field, the bounds that exist in that particular industry, for example. You know, say if it's an underground mine, what sort of limitations are there, you know, that allow you to perform your job to the optimum level, and also make decisions that are add value to that particular operation, but without obviously causing harm to the workers, without causing harm to the environment, and also ascribing to certain governance principles that are well accepted. So I think it's really trying to mold an individual who's aware of all of these things that exist or that govern them as a professional, or even as in their own personal lives. Because, you know, learning is not only about the concepts, it's really also about how am I going to affect the next person with the decisions that I'm going to be making. You know, this compound that I've mined, yes, it's a precious gem, but are there communities around here that I'm impacting by taking away this particular gem? Or am I polluting the environment? So you know, you find that, and even organizations nowadays are very intentional about, you know, these programs where you teach people about sustainability, they teach people about governance principles, how to be kind to the environment and to others, because this then, you know, really comes up with a holistic professional who's not only about the science and the science and the science. So it's quite a difficult one, because these systems that I'm talking about as well, the environment, for example, it's also a system on its own. You know, it's a whole ecosystem that's got life there. Do you want to be killing all the insects when you're mining, or do you know their role in biodiversity? In you know, if I make a particular decision about maybe removing some of them, what are the other impacts that I'm creating on other aspects now of the environment?
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any other question, comment, or topic of discussions? Don't be shy. No? Okay, well, I mean, I think then we will end this session. So first of all, thank you so very much, Merci, for your great presentation and for this very interesting topic. Are you planning to do any further research in that area, or is your PhD is your next topic?
Yeah, so I'm growing interest in other areas, your nuclear energies and how we can use those really, and for, you know, that we have a very big agricultural development program, and so we're trying to see how we can use some other energy sources for our agricultural development. So I'm having ideas around that. I still am very keen on critical thinking, because I'm actually moving into a new role now that deals with, you know, information and knowledge dissemination. And so one would then want to know, you know, I'm sharing all this information, hoping that people are able to make decisions based on information, but are they even able to make the right decisions, and how do I determine that? And so I'll see, perhaps then I'll also look at, you know, the critical thinking abilities in the workplace now, maybe in a particular workplace and so forth. But yeah, I'll definitely share with this community the ideas that I continue to develop.
Wonderful, thank you. That sounds very, very exciting. And Well, I think, yes, I think you inspired all of us today. So thank you so much again for taking on this presentation today on the end of the year. And thank you all very much for being here today. And once again, Moria and I wish you all a very nice holiday season wherever you are. And so we will start again our series of seminars for next year, probably at the end of January, and we will keep you updated on this. And yes, looking forward to see you again in 2024. Happy holidays to all of you. Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mercy. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye.